Hello everyone, welcome back to the Analyst for 2nd of February 2024, where we will be trying to understand the most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now, as you all know that today is the day after the budget, and majority of today's analyst discussion will be primarily focused on the budget. So the very first article is regarding discussing the various articles, facts, data, major initiative, achievement and schemes launched in the interim budget of 2024. In the next one, we will be following up the analysis of the editorials related to the interim budget. In the next one, we will be discussing a slightly different topic from the budget, that is the topic related to Aligarh Muslim University and its minority status. And finally, we will be trying to wrap up today's discussion with Genocide Convention and the ICJ's recent verdict regarding the same. Now, the very first article is a very important and interesting discussion on the interim budget 2024, because recently our finance minister has presented the same before the parliament, and this is very important for our GS3 mains, particularly to the topics of Indian economy. And let me tell you, the budget is not merely a subject which is constrained to economics, but also it is touching upon various other sectors of the syllabus too, such as social sector initiatives, right, and also the various initiatives that related to the environmental aspects, human development and so on. And that is why we need to discuss the same with great precision, and primarily the discussion related to our interim budget will be focusing on the very basic information first. Now, for our friends who have just started the preparation, let me just introduce the concept of budget to everyone. See, budget is a document that shows the estimated expenditures and the receipts for the government of India. Just like you who have various expenditures to run, such as your rent, your expenditures on food, travel and etc. The government has also various kind of expenditures. The main classifications of government expenditures are generally divided into two aspects. First is the revenue aspects, or the day-to-day expenditures of the government, such as the amount of expenditure that the government spends on government schemes, subsidies, paying government salaries, right, and so on. Then we have the other side of capital expenditure. This capital expenditure is generally the amount of money that the government spends on building new schools, colleges, roads, airports and so on. So this is the expenditure, or the part of the budget where the government is expecting that in the next financial year, the government will be spending this amount of money. We have another component which is known as the receipt side of the budget, where the government is trying to understand from where the government will be earning money. So here also there are two ways. First is the revenue side, where the government is generally concerned with the tax, with the non-tax such as fees, fines and so on. Next, we have the capital side of the receipts also, where the government also sometimes sells its PSU undertakings, or say ownership of the PSUs, right. Government sometimes also take loans from say various other banks, right, and also sometimes even foreign institutions such as the World Bank, IMF. They're also classified under capital receipts. So broadly, this was the aspects of the very basics foundation of the budget. Now from here, we need to look at the constitutional aspect of budget. See, in the constitution, we do not have the word budget mentioned whatsoever. We have something known as the annual financial statement. Now this annual financial statement is actually there according to the Article 112 of our Indian Constitution. And you know that 2024 is the year when the present government and also the entire country will be going into the elections. And that is why in an election year, it is not possible for the present government or the government of the day to present a full budget. And that is why the government comes with something known as interim budget, or the budget that is only say valid for the months from April to the months to around June and July. So this is the time period, roughly the time period of this temporary budget. And in the same time, we also come across a different term too, that is known as vote on account. Now, according to Article 116 of our Indian Constitution, we have a provision known as that any grant that the government can take in advance for its estimated expenditure. Now, whatever the money that the government or say the executive generally draws from the parliament is actually accounted in the budget. But sometimes the government also needs some emergency funds or some funds that the government need without say the approval of the Lok Sabha. And that is what, the particular provision of vote and account is present, that this is actually passed via the Lok Sabha, but not any debate is actually happening on the same. And here the government cannot draw any tax changes, tax proposals, something like that. But yes, whatever the estimated expenditure of the government will be incurred, right, the government can take that money from the say exchequer, and this will be valid for 2 months. And this is what also the same thing has happened in this particular interim budget. Now, these were all the basic information that you needed to know. Now, after this, we need to look in great detail as to what the provisions and the various highlights and the new features of this interim budget. Now, I assure that if you follow along the discussion, all the relevant information that you need for prelims and also for mains, and by information I mean the new initiative, the amount of data, schemes and facts that you need to know for exams, is more than adequate apart from rest of the discussion here. Now here, see the breakdown of the budget, or say if the government is giving X amount of money in this particular budget. Now what, or say in what sectors this money will be flowing into. The very first, or say the very big component of the budget or the money that the government will be spending on is the interest. Now what is this interest? This is the amount of interest that the government needs to pay for the loans that the government have borrowed so far. And let me tell you, a major chunk of the entire budget is paid for the interest. Now, can any one of you just pause the video and can tell me why this is in the comments? Now, let me tell you. This is because you know that in the years of 2020, 2021, right, the government of India had to spend a lot of money for what? To combat the evils of COVID-19 pandemic. Because for pandemic, the entire economy was in a slowdown and the entire industries were shut down and many people lost their jobs. That's why the government through Atmanirbhar Bharat used to spend money, and this money went into the healthcare sector, into the employment sector, industrial sector and so on. That is why government took many loans and the government is paying back the interest of those loans right now. Now, as you can see, the next major sections or the sectors here are the defense and the transport sector, followed by the funds that the center is transferring to the state governments. Next, we have the rural development and also the pension sectors, the food sector, agriculture, IT and so on. So here you get the idea where the money is actually flowing into, or where the expenditure is actually happening in the same. Now, when we are talking about expenditure, we also need to know or account for 1 rupee of our currency and where that 1 rupee is going to, and from where the government is also earning that 1 rupee. If we see, right, the 1 rupee is coming from, or say if I am taking only 1 rupee, the source from where that government is actually earning that rupee are borrowing and other liabilities. This is the biggest source. Next we have corporation taxes, we have union excise, income tax, net tax receipts and customs and GST and other taxes. So generally we can see that the government is earning mainly from borrowings plus taxes and also non-taxes too. Right? This is the source of income from the government. Next, where is the government spending after receiving this money? That same rupee is being spent in various other ways, such as interest payments, centrally sponsored schemes, subsidies, defense and so on, or broadly this entire budget breakdown that we have just seen. So these are the sectors where the government is actually spending a single rupee or a set amount of rupees. And here, starting with the key highlights here, the very first highlight that the finance minister actually said that the Indian real GDP is actually poised to grow at around 7.3% in this financial year. And this is a very, very good sign, as we can see also from this particular figure, that in dollar terms, the Indian GDP is actually growing much more faster if we combine the entire world GDP. And this is a very, very good sign. Why? Because if the Indian GDP grows, its people grows, and its economy grows, its various sectors such as agriculture, industry and manufacturing, they also grows along with the growth of service sector. And it also is a very good information because the Indian economy will also serve as a market for foreign investors, for foreign manufacturers and so on. So this is a very, very good and positive story. And alongside the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, it also says that by 2027, India will be the third largest country in terms of the economy or the size of the economy. Also, in the next 5 years, the finance minister says that India will be adding 2% to the entire global GDP growth. And this is a very, very major thing. And after the, major macroeconomical statements, we can find some very important insights coming from the taxation sector. If we can look at the various taxes and across a period of time from 2012 to present, and we look at various taxes such as corporate taxes, central excise, CGST, customs and income taxes and the various trends, we will be observing that the net direct taxes and their share over a period of time, their revenue share over a period of time have increased. And this is a very, very good sign because the more money that the government has in kind of revenue receipts, the more that the government can spend on various capital expenditures, right? So it is a very good sign. So this is the major outcome that we can see over the previous 10 years. Also, we can see that in the recent budget, in the recent interim budget, let me tell you, the government did not tweak or change any of the tax rates, be it say the income taxes or say the personal income taxes or say the corporate taxes. The government did not change anything. It kept the same taxes even with respect to the import duties. Next, the government announced that whatever the people of India and some of the taxpayers of India have some outstanding issues and some outstanding refunds or say outstanding tax liabilities with the government, right, that will be immediately solved, or the government can say that I will be not say withdrawing some money or say withdrawing some returns which are too old, right? These are some old disputes, right, which the government say that okay, I will be foregoing this kind of liability. So the people, the direct taxpayers can be relieved. Next, we can understand that tax buoyancy has also increased. This means that the tax collections to the percentage or say to in relation to the GDP, it has increased. That means that with increased amount of say gross domestic product or say GDP, the taxes are also increasing. This is a good sign because more taxes means more revenue for the government to spend on various other activities. Next, we also see that the direct taxes have trebled, as we can also see from this particular figure. And let me tell you, this figure is very, very important for your prelims because they generally ask about the long-term trends of taxes, fiscal deficits and so on. So be very thorough with this particular diagram. Next, the GST tax base has also increased over a period of time. That means more and more companies, industries are being compliant with the indirect tax such as the GST. Next, some more highlights we can also find out that the total receipts other than borrowing is amounting to around 30.8 lakh crore, out of which the tax receipts is around 26 around lakh crore. Next, the total expenditure is around 47.6 lakh crore, and we can understand that when the expenditure is more than receipt, we have a deficit. That same deficit as of now is actually known as fiscal deficit, which accounts for borrowings. It is estimated to be around 5.1% of the GDP in the coming financial year. So the finance minister says that we will be reducing our fiscal deficit, as we can see, as a percentage of GDP from around what we have at 5.8 to around 5.1% of the GDP. Also, please do note these fiscal deficit figures, this is very, very important for your examinations, especially prelims and also mains. Next, we also find that the FDI inflow is, over the last 10 years is accounted to around 596 billion US dollars. And this is a significant improvement because more and more FDI which comes into India is actually creating more jobs, creating more industries and so on. This is also leading to greater regional developmental too. So this is a very, very good sign. And India, and the finance minister is saying that India is trying to boost the same with more and more bilateral investment treaties with various nations, and this is also a very, very good sign. Next, when we try to analyze the amount of spending with respect to the subsidies, we can find that the amount of subsidies in recent years, they are decreasing over a period of time. And let me tell you one reason here. One reason is that if you can look at this particular year of 2021-22 or the COVID years and the Atmanirbhar Bharat years also, the government used to spend more, right? And that is why right now the government is trying to decrease its spending. Particularly why? Because the government wants to decrease its fiscal deficit. And it is a good sign because the government is maintaining a fiscal discipline. And we will be understanding this in the next topic. Right. In the next one, we find that the capital expenditure is also increased by a very magical number. As we can all see, that magical number is 11,11,111 crore. Right. This is actually in addition of around 3.4% of GDP and addition of around 11.1% of the last year's capital expenditure. Capital expenditure means, as I can repeat again, is expenditure that government does on schools, colleges, roads, airports, railways and so on. Because this is something which is increasing the assets of the government. And also, according to the various economic theories, more and more capital expenditure will be leading to more and more capital formation, or something which we also known as the multiplier effect. Imagine a railway infrastructure being improved. So more and more railways transport can take place, more and more cargo transport can take place, more and more industrial development can take place, and more jobs and employment exports can also take place. So this is something which is known as multiplier effect, and the government is actually focusing on the same. As we can see from the long year trend, if we can start from financial year 2005 to and continue the same study to around the present year, we find that the amount of public investment has fluctuated, right, over a period of time. As we can see, the reasons of fluctuations are given in different phases marked by colors here. As we can see, in the latest phase or the phase just after the COVID pandemic, right, after and during the COVID pandemic, the amount of public investment is increasing. Why? Because the government wants the nation to develop in kinds of physical infrastructure, or the infrastructure that is present in our national highways, railways, airports and so on. So the better the infrastructure is, the better is for the public sector to invest and come and also generate more and more employment and jobs. And this is actually what we mean by, the amount of infrastructure and multiplier effect. But there are some issues. As we can see, the amount of national highways which are constructed according to the targets that were fixed and the actual lengths, as we can see in recent years, this is also not matching up. So the government maybe needs to boost up the capital expenditure, and that is why it is boosting around 11.1% over the last year. And here we can also look at some of the welfare schemes. Now, when we are talking about welfare schemes, I am actually talking about the revenue expenditure here. Now, the government spends a lot of its money on welfare activities. Now, we can look at some of the welfare activities here. First is the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, or the amount of LPG cylinders that the government produces and gives to the women beneficiaries of a household. As we can see, this is kind of stagnant or decreasing over a period of time. If you look at the growth rate, right, year-on-year growth, but the absolute amount of beneficiary bases are increasing. In the next one, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, or the health benefit that the government gives to the people, this is also increasing over a period of time according to the funds. Also, if we can look, there is a fall in poverty level, and also we can see the government lifted more than 20 plus crore people outside the multidimensional poverty, or the poverty that the government wants to reduce in people in terms of water, sanitation, income, education, health and various other multidimensional levels formed by the UN and also the Niti Aayog. Also, we can see the amount of women participating in the Narega or the Manrega Yojana, Manrega scheme is also increasing or kind of remaining stagnant and even increasing. If we look at the PM Kisan or the amount of benefit that the government gives to the farmers in terms of 6,000 rupees annually or in 3 equal installments, this is the funds for that is actually decreasing. So this is a cause of concern. Next, we can also see the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, right? This is also a very, very encouraging thing that the government is spending more money recently and also is trying to increase its spending over a period of time. Next, we can see the PM Mudra Yojana is aimed at creating or say having created around 43 crore loans so far, and also out of this we can understand that 30 crore loans is actually given to women, and this is a particular initiative to boost entrepreneurial activities among the say MSMEs and small sector industries. Next, we also have something or 2 schemes related to food producing industries, such as the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana, which is trying to boost the amount of infrastructure such as cold storage, logistics and transportation in food production and food processing industries. It has so far benefited around 40 lakh farmers and generated around 10 lakh jobs. Also, we have something known as Prime Minister Formalization of Micro Food Processing Enterprises. This has so far assisted around creating jobs and opportunities for around 2.4 lakh self-help groups, and this is a particular initiative at promoting food producing industries at the very grassroots level, and this is also very, very encouraging. Next, we find various other developmental aspects, very, very important for your prelims and mains, because you are getting many important data, and the most important aspects is this is Government of India data. So you can liberally quote this data anywhere in your answers according to the relevant sections. If we can find, the very first is about the renewable energy capacity. This is increasing over a period of time. The female labor force participation rate, this is also increasing over a period of time, and do mention the years also. And you can also use this pictorial data. We can also see that there is a increasing or say trend of decreasing unemployment, right? You can see this is an increasing trend of decreasing unemployment. Next, we can see also major number of IITs built, AIMS built, also universities built over a period of time. And also the rising volume of digital transactions, especially through the revolution that the UPI has brought over the last few years only, right? So these were the major outcomes and achievements of the government over the last 10 years. Now, the government also announced some recent initiatives. Now, let me tell you, these initiatives have been announced, right? These have been announced, and the later details of the same will be coming out in the next few months or say even in the next year sometimes. So these are just on the paper as of now. The final details will be announced, and you are encouraged to keep a track on the newspapers when they will be announced, right? The very first announcement came from the renewable sector, that is creating rooftop solarization, right? This is actually installing solar panels on the rooftops of around 1 crore households, and this will be enabling these households to take around 300 units of electricity free of cost, because this they are getting directly from the sunlight. So they are themselves generating this particular energy, and their costs of electricity will be going down, particularly focused for the rural areas. Next, for the tech savvy population, that is people like us, the youth, right? The government has announced 1 lakh crore corpus, and this will be given mostly in form of 50-year interest-free loans, so that people who are interested in, for example, say AI, robotics, drone manufacturing and so on, particularly also the industries which are focused on research and development, they can take these loans and improve the amount of R&D, particularly because India's expenditure on R&D is abysmal at around 0.8% of the GDP compared to China's 2.2% of GDP. So that is why, to focus more and more R&D, the government has given this particular initiative. Next, to focus more and more on Indian railways, the government has focused creating 3 major economic railway corridors, focusing on energy, mineral, cement corridors, increasing port connectivity corridors, and also reducing the cargo and reducing the congestion related issues by creating high traffic density corridors. And finally, the government will also be focusing on modernizing the normal rail bogies and bring it as close to Vande Bharat standards. This will be actually improving the quality of commute for our own passengers. And finally, I have just given you this snippet from the formal budget document only, where you can use this particular developmental mantra as conclusions and also as introductions in your mains answers. You can get immediate brownie points if you quote the government agenda of the day, and that is the developmental mantra of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas to developed India at 2047, which the government also calls it by its Amrit Kal. Right? So these are all the things which are important for our discussion of budget and the overall highlights. In the next one, we will be trying to analyze some of the provisions here, particularly and pertaining to two different editorials. This one is from the Indian Express and this one is from the Hindu. And here we will be looking into the various aspects of analysis here. Now, the first editorial in Indian Express is giving a broad picture of the major achievements and the major announcement from the budget. Now, the author first focuses on two important terms, cyclical and counter-cyclical aspirations. Now see, we all know that economy or economic affairs of a country is actually based on a cycle of booms and busts, or say recessions, right? Or say, whenever the country experiences great prosperity, great amount of growth, that is actually known as boom. But immediately after a boom, a recession would follow. And in these conditions, during boom, right, the government tries to spend less. Because if the government spends more, it will be creating more money in the hands of people, giving more money in the hands of people, creating more inflation. So this is why, in cases when the economy is growing or giving a positive cycle, the government actually acts against the cycle. That is something known as counter-cyclical measures. During booms, the government spends less. During recession, such as when the government or say when the people do not have any money to spend. A prominent example will be the COVID pandemic, when the Indian economy became very, very close to recession, and the government actually spent money to boost the economy. As we can see right now, the economy is kind of boosted, and this is one of the reasons because the government spent back then. That is during recession. That this is actually what we mean by counter-cyclical policy of the government. And the author says right now that this particular budget is reminding the entire economy of a counter-cyclical budget, because right now the economy is increasing, and that is why the government is seeing that this particular budget needs to be cutting down on some expenditures, or say needs to reduce its spending, because the economy is increasing over a period of time and the government can afford to decrease the spending. But yes, you can understand that if the government is decreasing the spending, that means maybe it has to decrease spending on subsidies. And if the government is decreasing the spending on subsidies during an election year, this will be highly unpopular. But here the author says that the government is right now being very, very brave as to actually follow the economic principles, because right now we do definitely need some counter-cyclical measures, right? So this is a positive surprise for the entire economy. And here we can understand there are some other positives from the budget also, such as the 50-year interest-free loans which are given to states. This is actually not only say continued but also increased, and this is a very, very good sign because the states needs money. Next, the fiscal deficit target is very, very ambitious at 5.1% of GDP. That means that the government right now, which has fiscal deficit at around 5.8% of GDP, is trying to reduce it to around 5.1% in just the next year, or just it will be reducing by around 0.6% of the GDP in just 1 year. So this is very, very ambitious. Why? Because we have to understand that the government needs to slow down its spending. And we have all seen in the very first slide and the very first topic that a major chunk of our budget is actually spent on interest payments, and we need to decrease that liability. Further, the author also says that we must be not only decreasing the fiscal deficit but also decreasing the fiscal deficit very slowly, not very quickly. Because if we decrease the fiscal deficit, that means we are decreasing the amount of expenditures. Now if we decrease the amount of expenditures very swiftly, or say cutting down on subsidies, cutting down on government say servant salaries and so on, the people would not be happy, and it will also hurt the GDP. So that is why the author also says that government has actually taken a good step, because actually by 2025 to 2026, the government of India needs to cut down its deficit to around 4.5% of the GDP. To around 4.5% of the GDP in just 2 years. So government must not go too much quickly, but slowly here. Here, the government is also highlighting good amount of fiscal discipline, because it is very crucial to maintain a healthy debt to GDP ratio, because we can understand our own debt to GDP ratio is right now more than 70-75%, and the government is trying to bring it to around 70% as to the pre-COVID levels. And this is actually encouraged. Why? Because a high amount of debt to GDP, that means high amount of debt is not good, as we have also understood when the Sri Lankan economy was also suffering to the same. Its debt to GDP crossed more than 200-300%, right? So we cannot afford a major chunk of our GDP to be fueled by debt. So this is the particular thing. Next, the government is also improving the quality of its spending on various capital expenditures, such as increasing the same by 11%. This is actually good. A high amount of capital expenditure will be creating assets, and that is creating more employment and growing the economy over a period of time. Also, the quality of receipt is also very important, or the amount of tax receipts, or say the corporate taxes has actually increased to around 2.7% of the GDP. But actually this is not the highest. When the global economic financial crisis took place in 2007-8, our corporate taxes were actually 4% of the GDP. Right now, the economy is actually witnessing 2.7%, and it is also expected to increase. Also, GST collection is consecutively hitting for 5-6 months and crossing around 1.6 lakh crores in collections. This is also very good sign. And finally, the government also cut back on its disinvestment and privatization agenda. Why? Because as of now, we can understand the world is seeing an energy security crisis, and government of India, particularly wary of the Russia-Ukraine crisis and its impact on energy security, is trying to not right now focus on privatization of government PSUs focused on oil, energy and so on. Because the government needs those ownerships and assets of PSUs to control the energy security imperative in India. This is a good sign. And here, there are some issues also. For example, the first issue is with respect to the employment area. Such as the PLFS, is saying that the regular salaried employment during the last 5 years has stagnated. It is not a good sign for employment. Also, the next point is about discussed unemployment and its increase over a period of time. Such as that the most employment generated is generally unpaid family labor, particularly in the rural areas. And this means that more and more people are actually disguised in unemployment. Next, the real wages in agriculture have also stagnated because of generally high inflation levels and also low amount of rise in wages. Next, the growth is also not equitable nor inclusive. Why? Because we can understand that employment is not growing properly. If employment is not growing, but GDP is growing, then this excess amount of GDP benefits must be accruing to some people, and these people are those people who are giving rents, who are giving interests and also having lots and lots of profits, or the people who are actually having properties, and the people who are involved in the financial sectors, and the people who are involved in businesses. They are having most of the benefits of this increasing GDP, not the people who are left out. Right? The people who are generally on wages, generally people do not have any properties, and those amount of people who are suffering from high amounts of poverty level, inequality levels, they are losing out. And here, the next thing is about premature deindustrialization. This means that over the last 10 years, actually, the amount of people working in agricultural sectors have increased. at the expense of amount of people employed in the industrial or manufacturing sector. That means the workforce in manufacturing sector is going down, the agricultural sector is going up. What does this suggest? Deindustrialization, and this is actually taking place in India. This is a cause of concern which the budget has right now, interim budget, has not addressed so far. And finally, the country is also seeing deficits with China, trade deficits with China as high as 1/3 of its overall trade, and that is a very cause of concern, increasing the amount of current account deficits. So these are all the areas overall the Indian government has to focus on in the full budget, which will be coming in the months of June to July. Now, in the second analysis from the Hindu, this article is talking majorly on the agricultural sector. Now, to start with some sectoral observations, the author is starting with a very important term which is known as sectoral deflator. The sectoral deflator is actually the comparison of agricultural prices, agricultural and allied activities prices at, say, a particular year, which we know as a base year, to the prices that we have right now, or the amount of increase or decrease in prices pertaining to a constant year to the current year, right? So this is what actually do we mean by sectoral deflator, and we can understand this deflator is decreasing over a period of time. As we can see, over the last 10 to 15 years, this is decreasing, and the reasons are stated here. The reason, the very first reason, is a rise of cost of inputs of, say, fertilizers and so on for the farmers. Next, the market prices of agricultural commodities are also decreasing over a period of time. This is also cause of concern. The MSPs rose by around 8 to 9% between 2003 to around 2013, but in the next period, that is 2013 to 2023, it grew by only 5%, and this is not even the growth rate of, say, the entire GDP. So this is a cause of concern, because if the output of the economy is not increasing according to the prices of the commodities in agriculture, that is the MSPs, right, which are given to the farmers, it is showing that the farmers are not getting enough returns. And this actually also signifies that the real incomes of the farmers, of the agricultural laborers, are also decreasing, and this fell by around 1.4% between this time period. Unemployment also rose in the last 10 years, particularly among men, that, particularly right now they are at 2.8%, the rate of unemployment in rural areas, and women, it is around 1.8%. And the real wages also did not rise above 2016-17 levels, or the wages which account for inflation, particularly because of rising amount of inflation in the global arena. As we can see here, most of the countries right now are having, or say, or even up to 1 year back, we are seeing high cases of inflation. Next, also a low level of public investment, because the public investment or the government investment in, say, agricultural activities like building more canals, wells and so on, is stagnating to below 2% of the GDP, and this is not a good sign, because most of the Indian farmers, that is the 86% of Indian farmers, are small and marginal farmers, and they need better public services in agriculture, such as irrigation services and so on. That amount of public investment is also not focused in this particular budget. This is a cause of concern here. And there are some other specific particular problems with this interim budget. As we can see, this we have seen earlier also, the spending on the 3 Fs, that means food, fertilizer, fuel, have decreased over a particular period of time, and this will be impacting whom? The vulnerable sections of the population, because they rely on food subsidies, fertilizer subsidies and the fuel subsidies too. As we can see that there is no direct plan in this budget to address all these issues of the particular sector of agriculture. And also, this is the direct reflecting of the spending cut that the government is also witnessing, because the government want to reduce its expenditure, particularly due to a counter-cyclical fiscal policy, and also to reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.5% of GDP by 2025 to 2026, and the government is compromising on the revenue side, revenue expenditure side, because they want to focus on fiscal deficit and capital expenditure. And apart from this, we can also see some particular initiatives where the government is cutting down, such as the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana to build proper well-motored roads. The allocation has decreased. The Manrega's allocation have also decreased from 90,000 crores last year to 86,000 crores, and this is a particular area where a lot of rural laborers also find employment. And apart from that, the PM Kisan benefits are remaining same, right? It was launched in 2018-19 and the amount is 6,000 rupees. 5 years ago, the same amount the farmers are also receiving right now, without accounting for inflation or anything. The amount is 6,000. That must have been increased, or at least some changes must have been done. Also with respect to the fishery sector, which is a sunrise sector in India, and also the Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairy, they also have their budget increased marginally by around 130 and 193 crores respectively. This is not enough to meet the emerging needs of the sunrise sectors of fishery sectors, agriculture, animal husbandry and so on. So these are the things maybe we will be seeing in the full budget that will be due soon, and let us also wait for the same. In the next one, we will be looking at the Aligarh Muslim University's minority tag, because recently the Supreme Court reserved its judgment regarding this particular case. Now, before discussing the same, we need to look at the history of AMU a little. Now, AMU was initially known as the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, which was set up by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan in 1875, as we also know from our modern Indian history, right? The particular person also had various aspirations in mind, due to which he set up this particular college. Firstly, because he wanted the Muslims to overcome the educational backwardness, apart from the Hindus who were back then more educated and more progressive with respect to their careers and also educational forwardness. And also, he wanted more and more Muslims to prefer for government services and get involved in the government sector. Next, he also wanted to impart Western education, also focusing on theological aspects of Islam too. Apart from this, Syed also focused on advocating women education too. Finally, this particular college attained an university status via an statute of 1920 or Act of 1920, and right now it is a central university. And after this, we want to discuss a little more on minorities, because this entire picture is about minority institutions, and the minorities in India are not defined as per the provisions of the constitution. It is actually there in the provisions of the concurrent list, and that is why the government of India came up with the National Commission for Minorities Act of 1992, wherein the section 2 subclause C, it says that there will be some minorities which will be declared by the central government. And so far, these are the 5 groups of communities in India, and the latest ones were the Jains, who were included recently. Now, the minority educational institutes are actually given under Article 30 of the Constitution, where the minorities have the right to establish and run educational institutions, according to which the center will be, or say the government will be, entitled to give any compensation if they want to convert their minority status, and also they cannot discriminate on the basis of any aid or monetary incentives given to the same. Next, we find that according to the provisions of this fundamental right, the government came up with an act to enforce this fundamental right, which is known by the National Commission for Minority Educational Institutions. But here we have to understand that AMU's character of minority status is kind of different. In this particular aspect, this university is actually involved in a legal dispute since 1960s, starting from Aziz Pasha, versus Union of India. It was said that AMU was established via Central Act, and that is why the minority status cannot be given under 1920 Act, which was actually an act framed before the Constitution of India. And that is what we can understand, that this particular institute cannot claim minority status. This was stated in this judgment. In the following years, in 1981, the government of India, the central government of India, moved an amendment to the AMU Act and gave minority status. Now, after this, in 2005, the AMU published their reservation policies, and these reservation policies actually reserve 50% of seats for Muslims in medical courses, following which immediately a petition was raised at Allahabad High Court, which totally nullified the 1981 amendment which granted the minority status, overruling the Aziz Basha case of 1967, and this was actually also challenged again in Supreme Court in 2006. And in 2006 there were 8 petitions including the union or central government who contested the Allahabad High Court's decisions. But the center took a U-turn in 2016 where the union pulled out of the petitions, citing that the central government or the government in general need to be secular and cannot be involved in this particular dispute. In 2019, the Supreme Court referred the same case to a larger bench, the 7-judge bench, and right now in 2024, we are still awaiting, because the Supreme Court has reserved its judgment and will be releasing the judgment soon. So definitely check out the news relating to the same. Finally, we will be concluding our discussion with the Genocide Convention, because as of now the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to take measures to prevent acts of genocide in Gaza. And very important, why? Because current events of national and international importance we need to look at for our prelims. And here the entire name of the convention is Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. This is the very first human rights treaty which was signed or accepted by the UN General Assembly in 1948. This is very important for our prelims, so please do note it down. This convention actually defines genocide. You must be wondering, what is genocide? See, genocide is particularly perpetuated by any country or state. For example, there can be a particular country A which has an intent or a deliberate intention or a preconceived notion or a particularly planned action to do what? To destroy in whole or part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. Such as there are many religious groups, minorities, ethnic groups. So when that particular country A has a particular intent to totally destroy in part or whole that community, that ethnic group or any other religious group, through what? Through killing members, through bodily or mental harm, through having some conditions on groups of their lives to bring about their physical destructions, to imposing measures to prevent birth within that group, or forcibly even transferring the children of the group to another group. So these are actually human right violations, and that is why this is the first treaty to be granted that ratification by the UNGA. And here the claim of genocide is very important for us to understand, because in this particular news what happened is that South Africa actually moved a resolution or moved a particular case against Israel, against the persecution of the Palestinians in Gaza and Israel as a whole geographical entity. And South Africa actually moved this to whom? The International Court of Justice. On what basis? You can claim a genocide, or a particular country B can claim a genocide against a particular country A, or any particular individual can claim the same based on what? Based on 2 elements. The physical acts, that are these acts, and also the intent. This intent is very important, because if you do not have that intent, you will be getting some other serious human rights violations such as war crime, ethnic cleansing and so on, which are generally perpetuated by some groups within that nation A or something related to other, but not the government. But when the government of the day themselves get emerged or involved in this particular human rights violation, they have to be proved on 2 bases. First, the intent, and then the specific intent of the government or the nation as a whole. That is why we have to understand physical acts are not enough. And who can do the same? The International Court of Justice. And we can understand this International Court of Justice were also discussed in the previous analysis sessions. But to give you a very brief idea, it is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, established in 1945 directly by the UN Charter, where the principles of international justice need to be ensured. The seat is at The Hague, Netherlands, where International Court of Justice is the only specialized UN body to have not a seat at New York. The official languages are English and French, operated by 15 judges with 9 years terms, and the judgments here are final and binding with no further appeals if there are any new evidence or new revisions. Otherwise, there are no appeal to the same. The ICJ have limited powers with respect to genocide and war crimes, but the Genocide Convention says that automatically the ICJ will be having jurisdiction on the matter. Its judgment and the final verdict of the same, as we have seen recently the case of Israel also, the ICJ immediately saw, told and condemned Israel in the same. It is binding on the nation, but yes, we have to understand the country or say the particular parties of the UN generally have to obey willingly the ICJ order, because the ICJ do not have any mechanism to enforce its judgment. It is final and binding, but it does not have any particular mechanism to bind the same, and that is a particular issue in international justice areas also. So this was all for today. I thank you all for a very, very engaging discussion today, particularly on the union budget. The full budget will also be discussed in the coming months also, when the full budget will be released. Till then, we will be meeting again. All the best for your endeavors, all the best for your exams, and please do attempt the text which is following up right now. Thank you.